Okay, we are going to go ahead and roll. Most everybody's here, and we can fill in the gaps for anybody that still comes in late. I am so glad that each of you are here. You know, some of you have been extended a very personal invitation because of my experience with your children, and I appreciate that you trusted me enough to come check this out. Others have found out, you know, through social media or word of mouth, and I'm grateful for that too. This has a potential of changing your family's dynamics completely. It's not a miracle, there's no hocus pocus, wave a magic wand, this just happens. It's work, but it's fabulous work. So I'm looking forward to you being able to hear all about it today. Would you raise your hand if you are a parent or caregiver of someone, you know, on the spectrum or with another issue that you're looking to, good, great. Any educators in the room? Or retired educators, yay, lots of those too, great. And some of you here, just because you're curious, want to know more, and that's all right too, okay? We are very privileged to have Dr. Dana Johnson presenting today. She is the regional expert in this field, and I've been privileged to have her as my mentor as I've been going to school learning this method and practicing on some of your kids. Some of those, I see those sweet faces in the room. Dana has her PhD, MS in OT. Oh, what's the OTRL?
So the OT is the occupational therapy degree, and then the PhD is in child adolescent mental health and development.
She is the owner of Interplay Therapy Center and the founder of Invictus Academy of Tampa Bay, a nonprofit private school for students with sensory motor differences. Dr. Johnson has been working with individuals with motor and sensory differences for over 15 years. I had the privilege of meeting her initially through a couple of our students who were attending her therapy center and her school. And those of you who are from Idlewild would know Grace and Landon, and you have heard some of the phenomenal progress that's been made. I look forward to you being able to see some of that with your own kids. This is Dr. Dana Johnson. I am Dina Troyer. So you got Dana. Everyone will be confused today. Get her right, Dana. And I'm the director of special needs ministry and related programs here at the church. And I'm a practitioner of S2C, finishing up my training. And looking forward to being able to possibly work with some more of you. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much, Tina. I am very excited to be here. And just to get everything off on a good start, I am very comfortable and used to movement, and if people need movement, if anybody needs movement, if anybody needs to get up and move around and walk in front of me, walk around, it does not bother me in the least. I speak at a lot of conferences where we are grateful to have our non-speakers and our unreliable speakers who do need extra movement, and they are walking around. They love, the stage is like their thing. Microphones are like their thing. So I just want to let everybody know it does not bother me. So if you need to do what you need to do, go for it. I am, like I said, I'm very happy to be here. I am local in the Tarpon Springs, Trinity area. That's where my practice is, Interplay Therapy Center. And as Dina also mentioned, I am the founder of Invictus Academy Tampa Bay. It's K through 12 private school for students with sensory motor differences. All of them use spelling to communicate as a reliable form of communication as they're working through their academics. Everything's at age appropriate, grade level. So if your child comes in at or they're used to doing second grade work, but they're supposed to be in 12th grade, they will be in 12th grade, and we will work to catch up everything in terms of the holes. We're going to talk about how there aren't as many holes as we actually think and why that would be. I also am the co-founder of Empowered 2, and that is an organization that my colleague Dawn Marie Gateman, she's out in San Diego, she's also a practitioner. She also has a private clinic out there, and we come together to support families. We do week-long immersion programs supporting them for spelling and for motor. We're going to talk a lot about movement, intentional movement, and what that means. And so I just do all of this stuff in my spare time because I love it so much. I'm passionate about this. I'm thrilled that Dina has invited me here. I'm thrilled that Dina is part of the community. There are so many families that we can work with in the Tampa Bay area. I know you can probably think of a few. You're here, but I'm sure you can think of a few more. And as we go through this, the plan for today is for me to talk. I love having conversations. So if it's something where you're like, I have a burning question, please feel free. You can ask me. It's not going to divert my focus. But we do have a Q&A after this where Dina and I will be happy to answer questions. And then after that, we have a couple of spellers, one who is going to be here live, and then we also have one on Zoom to answer your questions about, spelling, their journey. We have both parents will be here. They can answer questions from a parent-to-parent perspective also. So we're looking forward to learning from everybody here. Okay, so just to start, and I don't know if I have to point this, so if it's not turning, somebody yell at me so I can do that. So today we're going to go through an introduction of spelling to communicate, talk about some terminology so that everybody is kind of on the same page, because I do talk about certain things and I want to make sure that everybody has an understanding of things like apraxia and what that is, sensory motor movement differences. What are those? We're going to talk about that. Going over spelling to communicate in the process. There is a specific process to how we work with our families in terms of teaching both the parent and the speller the method. Now keep in mind, and I'll probably say this over and over again, your child after the age of 2 or 3 can already read, know their letters, all of that academic stuff, age appropriate wise. Okay, so when I have spellers that come in and families that come in and parents are unsure as to whether or not they can identify letters or they can read, I'm like, they absolutely can. And I'm going to show you why. So I'm not teaching, Dina and I are not teaching your child how to spell. We already believe that they can spell, and that if you can spell, you can read. So it all works together. They just do it differently, and I'll explain that. Oh, sorry. And then as far as the evidence goes, so there are articles and research that's out there currently that discusses not only spelling to communicate, but what I'm going to focus a lot on, which is apraxia and the challenges with intentional movement. And then I'm going to finish off with making sure that you have resources and links to certain things, and you're welcome to take, I know some like to take notes like I do on paper, others like to take snapshots and pictures of the slide, completely fine. I just want to get that out there because sometimes people are unsure and I want you to be able to have those resources, okay? All right, so first off, what is communication through spelling? What is spelling to communicate? What is S2C for short? So S2C is the short version of spelling to communicate. So spelling to communicate, what we do is we teach the motor skills to point to letters in order to spell to communicate. So you're going to hear me say, I'm more generic in my terms, so I'll say communication through spelling, I'll say spelling to communicate, I'll say S2C, all of the same thing, okay? It's essentially learning the motor skills to point to letters, to spell, to communicate, okay, as a primary method of communication. Now, I need to start talking about some of the terminology. So, praxis, what is praxis? Anybody heard the term praxis before? Awesome, good, okay, excellent. So praxis is our ability to learn a new motor movement. So I want everybody to think, you can think back to when you first learned how to ride a bike, you can think back to when you learned a musical instrument, you can think back to when you learned how to drive a car. All of those things required you to be able to plan, sequence, organize, execute, complete the movement, and stop your body. That's the process of learning a new motor movement. So if you think about riding a bike, you had the idea to ride a bike, you get on the bike, you're sequencing and moving your body to get on the bike. Now, the first time, you're gonna need support. You're gonna need someone to tell you what to do with your body. You have the idea of riding the bike, the image is probably in your head because you've seen other people ride a bike before. But actually doing this requires you to have a good connection between your brain, the idea, and your body to be able to physically do the act. So think about riding a bike and then somebody helping you to do it, and then you're practicing. And what you're doing when you're practicing is building the connections between your brain and your body. So anything that you learned how to write from little, even to today, if you're anybody learning something new right now, yes, what are you learning? Okay, a different approach to education for the computer. So you, I'm assuming, need to put so much more energy and concentration into that, it's not necessarily automatic. Okay, perfect. Exactly, it is exhausting, isn't it? Thank you for saying that. I'll tell you why I'm appreciative of in a second. So, very exhausting, very taxing. Now, most of us don't go through this intense process for everything we do all day, every day. Most of us just go through the motions of our morning routine. I mean, coming here, if you think about a typical weekday, you have your alarm goes off at a certain time, you get up, you make breakfast maybe, you go for a shower, or whatever. If you've ever noticed, you actually shower the same way every single time. Has anybody ever thought about that? So you do, because you're thinking about other things. The things that I think about in the shower, I should have a pad and paper in there because I remember so many things in the shower, it's crazy. And so you're thinking about, but you get the task done, it's good. Now, if I said to you, I want you to use your left hand for every single thing that you do when you go home, and I want you to mix up the order of shower. I want you to start with your feet and then go, because most people start at the top and go down, okay? Now, all of a sudden, you have to put so much energy into finishing that task, that motor task, right? You can just imagine that. And so this is what, when we're thinking about praxis, and then we're thinking about what apraxia is, our kids, your students, your kids, those that you know that have been diagnosed with autism, for specifically 87% of those with autism also have what's called apraxia. And apraxia is the breakdown of praxis, what we just talked about. And so when I told you to think about doing things differently, or think about learning to ride a bike or driving a car, Jamie up here said it was exhausting to learn anew, right? That is how our kids have to go through life every day because their bodies don't necessarily make those connections to go to automatic. They do, they can, and they absolutely can. But this is where when you say, okay, go to the kitchen and get a glass of water because you're thirsty, right? Go to the kitchen and get a glass of water. And they walk right past the kitchen. And you're like, what's going on? Like, they did it yesterday, they did it an hour ago, like, what's going on? They must not understand. I better say it again, because they didn't quite get that. They probably didn't hear me. Or maybe they don't want to. Those are all kind of what goes through our mind. What's actually happening is apraxia. And apraxia it's described the inability to perform a particular purposeful action, even though there's normal muscle strength and tone, and even though they understood what actually is the task. So this is the disconnect between the brain and the body. And so right now, all of you realize that I'm speaking English because your brain, the language centers in your brain are processing this. I'm presuming that all of you understand what I'm saying, but I'm not asking you to respond, but I'm still presuming that you're understanding, right? Now, for your child, they understand all of this as well, but the disconnect is when the movement has to happen. And so if you think about every single time that your child has been asked to do a test at school, a test in therapy, an IQ test, you just asking them to go do something, every single time that isn't representing their cognitive ability, that's representing what their body actually can't do. And there isn't a test out there that I'm aware of, unless somebody can tell me, that requires motor. Everything you have to point, even the nonverbal tests. So the nonverbal test, especially in speech therapy, they have nonverbal tests. It's, the speech therapist doesn't talk. They still have to point and identify things. So that requires praxis, that requires intentional motor movements that are connected between our brain and our body. So for example, many of my clients, they'll come in and they'll be like, the parents will typically say, you know, they don't know how to spell, they can't identify this, da, 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 da. And I'll explain this and I'll say, okay, well, let's think about this from a motor lens. And that's what I want all of you to start thinking about now, is everything through a motor lens. Meaning, are they required to do intentional motor? Meaning, they have to look at two options, the cow or the chicken, and identify the chicken, right? They know it, but what happens is their body goes to the cow. And so then what happens? Well, they don't know, I guess we better teach them over again, right? So that's why at school, and even in my clinic, we'll have parents that come in and it's like, oh, they're actually only at second grade level. Well, they're at second grade level because that's what they can demonstrate. That's not what they know. They're two separate things, okay? So, and that's due to apraxia. It's due to the disconnect. And apraxia has nothing to do with intellect, has nothing to do with cognition. Okay, so just some more terminology. So non-speaking, we use the word non-speaking instead of non-verbal. Non-verbal tends to be what's out there. Non-speaking, or I should say, sorry, non-verbal means without words. And as you will soon find out from our non-speakers in a little bit, and then this afternoon with some of the kids that are coming in, they actually have a ton of words because they're spelling a lot of words. Non-speaking is actually what they can't do. So they just can't speak. But that doesn't mean that they can't think. That doesn't mean that they don't have words. So we just use the word non-speaking. We also have unreliable speaking. So those, I have a lot of clients that will come in and have speech, but it's not intentional. And these clients that I have and students that I have, and they've even said to me over and over again, it's so hard because people see speech as like the gold standard, right? So if you can speak, that's just awesome. But still, it doesn't really demonstrate at all your cognitive ability because you can still say something over and over again that's incorrect, and we think that that's what they know when it's not, because they're unreliably speaking. So they still are candidates for spelling because even though they have a little bit of speech, they have so much more that they want to say to be able to get out. But again, it goes back to the motor. I'm going to show a diagram in a second with respect to specifically fine and gross motor. So speech and language are two different things. Oopsie, sorry, I changed it. So, and I have a slide on this in a second, but speech is our ability to communicate our thoughts. So that's the motor part, 100% motor. Language is 100% cognitive. And so we don't actually have an assessment that can only assess cognitive. We don't have one because it requires motor to be able to demonstrate that. So when you think about, often speech and language come together, and if you have a child that has an IEP, a lot of times they'll have language goals on it when it really should be speech goals because it's a motor issue and not a cognitive issue. And so often the students are needing to demonstrate, again, demonstrate implies motor, and they have to demonstrate language, meaning, put the cow on top of the chair, and then they play with it, and then it's concluded that they don't understand the language, which is on top or under, or put it on top or, just follow the task. So that's where these are important terms that we just have to define so that when I'm talking about things like, okay, this is a motor, this is a cognitive, and we often use a lot of cognitive terms in order to describe the body. So focus, right? Focus. They're moving around. You've got to focus, attend. All of these things are cognitive tasks. They're demonstrating something and you're like, they don't remember, right? So going back to what I said about going to the kitchen and getting a glass of water. Well, they don't remember. Well, that's a cognitive task, right? So we have to then kind of start to shift. And I didn't say this at the beginning, either did Dina, but this is a paradigm shift, by the way. This is something that literally is going to go against a lot of what many of you have already been told, whether it's about your child, whether it's about someone you work with, but this is completely shifting your thinking, and it's a process. I have many families that take a long time to go, but wait a minute. My child is 42 years old. You think I'm gonna wait? I've had this many years. And there's so many things too where it's like, I've already given up hope. So this is kind of dangerous because I'm almost like, I'm pretty much have concluded that this isn't. So it takes everybody their own time to then figure out what is it that, when am I going to make that paradigm shift? All right, so everybody benefits whether you're a non-speaker, a minimal speaker, or unreliable speaker. So a minimal speaker does have some speech, and some of it is reliable, absolutely. But the unreliable speakers, for example, I have a student who would come in and say, "Good morning, Miss Dana, how are you today?" I'd be like, "Good morning, how are you doing? Yesterday, I went golfing with my dad." "Oh, you did? What was your score?" "Well, tomorrow we're gonna go to Disney World." And so it's this choppy, not very scripted. And I remember approaching his mom and saying, "Oh, he would be great for spelling." She's looking at me like, "Do you know how long we worked in speech therapy? Like, what are you talking about?" And as soon as he started spelling, he would start talking about how his mouth was the worst thing ever because people would take what he said and then would get stuck in his loops with him. And it just would drive him crazy because he didn't want to say it. But that's because, of course, you're not going to not respond to somebody. I mean, that's really rude. But that's what he asks us to do, is don't respond to my mouth. Only respond to the letter word. And so when I've had him do a couple of panels with me because, again, he wants people to know that unreliable speakers need this too. And, he'll start talking to me on the panel and I'll just ignore him. And I mean, people are like, "You're the worst therapist ever. Like, what are you doing?" But that's because I'm honoring what he wants. And he continuously tells me, "Thank you," because I want people to learn. I want people to know that this is what we want. Okay, so presuming competence. And I've kind of started talking about this in terms of when I said that your child may, if your child is over the age of 5, for sure they can read and they can spell. And this applies to the term presuming competence and what that means. So presuming competence means that I believe that your child has the ability to learn and wants to learn and understands everything, and unless they demonstrate otherwise. And I have, to this day, worked with hundreds of non-speakers and unreliable speakers of ages between the ages of 4.5, almost 5, through my oldest client is 58, and have never had somebody who could not do this, ever. And so it's like, and I feel, when I say that, I feel like I'm like on an infomercial, and it's almost like, okay, Dana, like seriously. I haven't, and the reason is it goes back to their motor. It goes back to their motor. It's not about their cognitive. And so all these years, your kids have taken in information and are learning, and because they can read, they're in the grocery store checkout line. They know the headlines, right? Because they can sit there and look at the magazines and newspapers, and they read the ticker out along, the bottom of the screen. And you guys are talking about like family topics or whatever. They understand and are taking it all in and know that. Now, when I say that to parents, that's really awesome. But then parents look at me and are like, "Oh, great, that's awesome." Which is, again, part of the process. It's all part of the process. So The reason why we presume competence is based on Anne Donnellan and Martha Leary's work, and then Cheryl Jorgensen. So Anne Donnellan and Martha Leary wrote an article, Rethinking Autism, and it's a great one. Cheryl Jorgensen wrote the article on the least dangerous assumption. And that's what we're talking about. If you had a choice to presume competence or to not presume competence and teach someone well below their grade level based on what they're able to demonstrate, what would be the least traumatic? And that would be presuming competence. The other alternative would be way more traumatic for them. So that's where when we have students that come into our classroom, even though they cannot spell, or when I say cannot spell, I mean on the letterboard, when they're not spelling, and then even though I have, you know, a 25-year-old coming in to see me at the clinic, and the parents are like, well, he's not demonstrated any of that. It doesn't matter. I'm reading a lesson in the clinic, age appropriate for them, and they're going to be asked, you know, different questions to practice the motor. I'm going to talk about that in a second. That are age appropriate. Words are going to be age appropriate. I'm not starting with a 25-year-old to spell cat, hat, mat, park, all of those. We're going to go beyond that. But then in the classroom setting, every student is taking in the information. So even though they can't demonstrate that in the moment quite yet because they're not fully open, I'll explain what that means in a second on the letterboards, doesn't matter. They're still learning. So we also find that because students have been exposed to other ways of education, for example, they have a sibling that is in another grade and they hear them or observe them watching them doing their homework, they're picking up on that information. I've had some of my clients say that they're in the special ed or autism class, but then down the hall, there's their 7th grade class. Well, they're taking in that information because they can hear very well, by the way. And so they're taking in that information also. So there's many different ways that they have taken in. And when you don't have a certain sense, we know that your other senses are heightened. And we think about sensory, a lot of our clients, my clients, and maybe some of your kids, the auditory piece is so sensitive. So their ability to hear things that we cannot hear is unbelievable. I have a student at school where he kept leaving the classroom, and we were like, what can we do? We need to help you you need to get the information. And he spelled to us and he said, well, actually I hear better across the hall in that classroom with the door closed. So can I, have that set up in there? And sure. It's fine. He heard better with the door closed of that classroom and his teacher was teaching on the other side. So individuality, not everybody is like that, but it's just an example of how we can't think through our lens of, well, I learned this way, I perceive the world this way, completely different. Okay, so a little bit, I'm not going to go too into neurology, I'm not going to go too much into anatomy and this kind of thing, but this is really important to know. So going back to our speech versus language. So speech, I said, was 100% motor, language is 100% cognitive. So when we hear, so right now, you all are listening to me, this information that you're listening to is actually going into your brain through what we call Wernicke's area. Okay, so you're listening to me, you're processing the language that I'm saying and the terms that I'm using, and then it's now going down, and I wish I tried my pointer, I don't think I'm tall enough. But, so here's right up, that dark green circle is Wernicke's area up there, okay? And then there's a whole bunch of fibers that go between Wernicke's area, the green circle, to Broca's area, which is the purple circle, okay? So this is all still cognitive. This is nothing to do with motor here. Now, the dark purple circle we say is the motor speech area. Still not motor happening. It's just, that's where your expressive language is held. So if I ask you a question, your question would go into the Wernicke's area of your brain, you would process that, It would then go down a whole bunch of fibers to Broca's area, and that's where your response would be generated. And then there's motor neurons that then take that response, and then they're connected to the articulators of your mouth, which then the motor happens, and your response comes out, okay? So with our spellers, everything in there is intact. The breakdown happens between Broca's area and the articulators. Okay, so Broca's area or the hand to point. Broca's area or writing, anything that requires motor, which remember everything requires motor. Everything. You guys doing everything all day, every day requires you to have intentional motor and automatic motor. We're going to talk about that in a second. But that's where that breakdown is between the brain and the body. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, so this slide is just demonstrating, this is called the motor homunculus. So this is a cross-section of the motor cortex in your brain. And I want you to notice that what it is a representation of how much of that motor cortex is associated with parts of the body. So look at the face, look at the lips, look at the hands. Okay, huge portion of the motor cortex is attributed to the lips, the face, and the hands. So, and the eyes are in there too in terms of the face. But what this is showing is that the majority of your motor cortex goes to here, your articulators, and your hands, and they're the finest motor movements of your body. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with gross motor and fine motor, and if you have a child, you probably have heard, oh, there's gross motor delays, fine motor delays. And then OTs, like myself, not like myself, used to be like myself, but what we would do is we would then be like, oh, handwriting, oh, let's go and target the fine motor because that's what we do, especially in schools. But meanwhile, we're looking at the connection between the brain and the body and the intentional movement and gross motor, and that's really challenging. So why are we targeting finer before gross motor? Because we develop, if you think about when we're young toddlers and we're learning how to walk, and we don't learn how to write first, right? We don't learn how to do fine motor skills, we learn gross motor skills. So because of that disconnect between the brain and the body, your child didn't actually develop fully with the gross motor ability. The other thing is postural control. When I have spellers come into the clinic, and I will tell you that we all have bad posture, but I was looking for a chair to kind of demonstrate. But so we'll sit, and then what happens is we usually go into like that C pattern. So our hips fall forward, and then our chest goes forward, and that's, I mean, all of us are like this anyway, so we all need to do this. So it's really funny because when I'm like adjusting the posture of the speller, I then turn and the parents are all like sitting on like that too. Because I'm like, yep, shoulders back, and everybody does shoulders back. So, but that's just because we do a lot more sitting than we should, and we're also on electronics and the computer and everything a lot more. And so that also is with our kids. And so we need to develop this, but then what happens is that creates a weak posture and weak core. And so then we can't hold our bodies up. It's impossible. So that's then when I'm like, I see a lot when we're sitting in the chair. And when we don't have good posture, that's going to affect spelling because it's going to make it harder. We want to be able to accurately point to the letters. But so it's all these things. It's not just, spelling isn't just sitting in the chair and pointing the letters and spelling. We're going to go through the process in a second. But so much of it is the body piece. And I'm going to talk about the eyes, which is a big part of it too. Right now. Okay, so eyes, like I said, along with our articulators and our digits, our eyes have ocular muscles as well, and they're very, very tiny. So typically, when I say to parents, well, has your child had a vision exam? And I always want to rule out, make sure that, focusing and acuity is good. And most of the time it is, unless parents are saying, well, they're squinting, they're signs, squinting or holding things close. But most of the time, it's okay. So then they'll say, well, what about their ability to move their eyes intentionally? And they look at me like, well, what do you mean? I mean, I've never noticed. And we wouldn't. Why would we notice, or why would we think that the individual isn't looking to where they want to go or what they want to look at. Our eyes direct our movement. So for example, if I'm going to go and walk through this aisle and walk out the door, I have to get my eyes on the door. Otherwise, my body's not going to go in that direction. Well, we have muscles that control our eyes. Well, I just said that there's a disconnect between the brain and the muscles of our body to get intentional movement. So that means, oh, that's why a lot of our kids have difficulties getting from point A to point B, because their eyes can't get there, can't get their bodies there. So a lot of my work too is working on ocular motor and building their ocular motor skills, because they need control of their eyes as well. I also want to make sure that they can see clearly and perceptually. Like I have a lot of spellers that have depth perception, or they see double, and of course that's going to affect any accuracy on the letterboard. So we want to make sure that we're working on these things, but it's not something that you would just see. No pun intended with that. So it's again something that I can talk about if there's additional questions, but something that's important to think about. Okay, so this slide is really looking at, we move our bodies. There's 4 ways that we build our motor skills and that we then in turn move. I'm going to kind of start in not the actual left to right like you typically would. I'm going to start with what we already talked about. So we talked about purposeful movement. We talked about praxis. That's purposeful movement. Learning how to do a new task that's planned, sequenced, organized, and then we execute it, and then we do the movement. If we have to adjust our bodies, our brain will help our body adjust to not hit the edge of the corner of the chair, and then we walk down the aisle and we finish it. So that's what we do when we're learning a new task. And then when we practice something over and over again, it becomes automatic. We also say that practice makes permanent. Okay, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And the reason why practice doesn't make perfect is because you can have an impulsive movement, such as some of my clients are self-injurious or injurious towards others. And so when self-injury, for example, they will bite their hand and they have calluses, so that's something that they have done over and over again. So now it's permanent. When you practice something, it makes permanent. So yes, we want the automatic, because the permanent, we want that. Like now I know how to ride a bike. I can't unlearn how to ride a bike. It's great. My brain is teaching me and I'm able to do this. But it also can then be difficult to stop some behaviors that are practiced over and over again because they've essentially wired that in. So reflexes, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Reflexes are what are there for protection. Okay, so I'm cooking. I'm not going to go, my hand is burning on this stove. Maybe I should move it away. You actually don't think about that. It doesn't actually get to your cortical center of your brain, which is the highlighted on the purposeful and automatic. It's highlighted. That's the thinking part of the brain. Okay? Now, the reflexive and impulsive, that's the lower center or subcortical. There's no thinking there. We just do it as a reaction. So that's why when we put our hand over a hot stove, we then can pull it away. Okay? We're not thinking. Now, impulsive, I want to spend a little bit of time on, because impulsive is also non-thinking. Okay? We're not thinking when this happens, and a lot of my spellers, a lot of my students have impulsive movement. It could be self-injurious, it could be injurious towards others. By the way, I use self-injurious or injurious towards others, because when we use the term aggressive, that implies that there's intent. If I'm being aggressive towards someone, I'm thinking that I'm going to be aggressive because I'm mad, so I'm going to act aggressively towards them. Okay? When my spellers are in this impulsive area of their brain, it's fight or flight, and there's no ability to stop their body. It's literally like, I am going to punch you because I am so anxious right now because my body can't do what I want it to do. And then it's, again, terms aggressive, but it's not. And so then how do we deal with that? What do we do, right? Because I get families that'll come to me because it's like, well, we've been doing ABA for so long and nothing's happening and they're addressing the behavior, but then something else comes up. And impulsive movement happens when one, or sometimes both occur. A sensory experience or an emotional experience. Now, anxiety is an emotion. And because our spellers tend to be anxious because of the sensory environment, or they don't have control of their body, they're going to be very quick to be impulsive because they're already up here. And so we need to recognize that one and then help bring them down to more regulation. And then the impulsivity will be less likely to happen, okay? So now an emotional experience or a sensory experience. So sensory-wise, like I said, if the auditory information or the sound, volume, any of that is too much, that sometimes too will elicit an impulsive response. Now, if it's something that they tend to do, like pinch, kick, hit, whatever, that's going to be their impulsive response. Now, as far as the emotion goes, I said emotion, I didn't say negative emotion. I didn't say when they're angry. I didn't say when they're frustrated. Even though that's what it looks like, it's not. I've had a speller who was working with me on a PowerPoint presentation because he wanted to present to his school about spelling and how much, this was his older school, and about how much he's learned and all of this. And all of a sudden we're in the middle of spelling and he just jumps up and literally I thought he was having an anxiety attack. It looked like a pin. His eyes bugged out, he was like jumping up and down, he was like this, and nothing I'd ever seen before. And I was like, okay, we gotta get him just down. His mom and I were able to help co-regulate him. He was biting himself. It was like really high intense. And when he finally was able to regulate, I asked him, I was like, what just happened there? He goes, I am so excited that we're going to be doing this. But if somebody else had observed that had no idea about this, it would have been like, he hates this, he doesn't want to do it, he's so frustrated, I'm pushing him too far, X, Y, Z, because it's a negative thing. And we always say, insides do not match outsides. Because we don't know what's going on inside 100%. And so I treat it and I talk about it as dysregulation. So impulsive, I say dysregulated, because that's really what it is. We're like non-speaking, that's what it is. Dysregulated, that's what it is. It's not aggressive. They're not intentional, because how many of you can think of a time that it happened and then the person was like, felt horrible afterwards? Like absolutely horrible, and they came and hugged you and they were like, that's because they have no control in that moment of what happened. And quite frankly, if you were, in your car walking out late at night, you would have like, pow, if somebody came up behind you, and that's what's going on. And then you practice that over and over again because you're in that situation being misunderstood. Guess what? Permanent. And then it doesn't matter, it's going to be a reaction. So when I work with families and I work with spellers that have that, are more impulsive, we address things through building the purposeful motor pathway. We want the long, intentional, the long pathway, so neurons, and the way that everything gets sent between the brain and the body is through neurons. We want to build that up because that's control. They're going to have control of their body that way. I don't address the impulsivity. I don't, because I know, one, they're not intentionally doing that. And when they know that I know that, and they know that mom and dad know that, everything changes. Everything changes. They don't have as many, quote, behaviors. They don't, because they get that other people finally get them. They're not as anxious because they know they're understood. So everything works together. It's just learning how then to do it. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, so just to review, everything that we do when we're spelling, we coach the motor. So when I start going through the process of spelling to communicate, we coach the motor on the 3 boards, which I'm going to demonstrate when we're first starting. The whole goal of when we start is coaching the motor, getting them to poke and back. I have so many clients that will come in, they can poke, but how often have they ever done this movement? So a lot of them will poke in the letter, and then they'll be stuck, they'll be like, what? okay? And I'm like, back, 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 bring your elbow back, so I'm coaching them, and it's like, I trying, but it's the connection, it's not going, it's a new movement, I need you to help me. And so that's our first thing, is that we're poke back, we're getting that poke back movement, okay? And when they make a mistake, it's because of their motor. It's not because of the cognitive. And I'll just keep saying that over and over again. Posture, so this is where we're talking, when I talked earlier about postural control and keeping the body up, it's really, really important for that. This actually, because this, Maddie, it's Maddie, and actually that's Don right there. Maddie is tall. If any of you are spelling with myself or Dina later, you will see that the board is actually below the table, lower. Maddie is tall, so it's fine to do that, but most of my spellers, I go lower. And the reason, I don't want it to feedback, that's why I'm a little, is because when we think, oh well, this is eyes, right? Eyes up here. But if you watch, now my shoulder is going to be exhausted in 2 seconds. So by bringing it down, my eyes, it's easier for my eyes to bring down, and then my shoulder and elbow move like a hinge like this. So that's why we want that motion. That's why we want that posture as well. Okay. So now let's get into the actual spelling and what's the progression and how do we do this? Okay. So the first, anybody that comes into my clinic, no matter what, and I have spellers that come in that will use a keyboard, that use other AAC devices, which by the way are totally fine. I have parents that will ask me and say is it going to conflict? Is it going to, is that going to, make this process harder or vice versa? Absolutely not. And any AAC device or PECs or anything that your child has been taught in the past and are using, that is communication. I'm never going to take communication away from anybody. And so this is really, if you want to think about it as refining their motor skills, this is what it is, and then it's also communication, and then when they really refine their motor skills. So if you can see that here, the letters are large. It's the alphabet's divided into 3 different boards, and that's to teach the motor. And so what's going to happen is that they are going to, if this was a pencil, they're going to spell words by poking the pencil through and out, in and out, and it's high for the purposes of you seeing it. But this is how they're going to do it. Now, the reason why we have the pencil going in, through, and out is to provide sensory input. So a lot of my clients, they need additional sensory input. So the pencil is going to provide that. And then even if they need more, I have weighted pencils that I use. So I use, this is heavy, it's a little weight, and they also get the feedback from when they slide the pencil back out. Okay, so that gives them like an awareness of their arm so they can actually do the movement. So we start on the 3 boards, and I'm going to talk about what do we spell? I'm going to talk about that in a second. And so after we have developed really good solid accuracy on here, meaning I'm asking them to spell something and they literally are, everyone, getting their eyes there, poke back, getting their eyes there, poke back, getting their eyes there, poke back. Super accurate. Then we introduce the 26 board. And you can see obviously the differences between the sizes of the letters, right? So we need to have really good ocular motor. We need to have really good ability to process sensory information. We need to have really good fine motor skills because the jump between here and here is much less than on here. So this is, again, we're riding the bike, right? Anybody who's either taught somebody how to ride a bike or remembers learning how to ride a bike, it wasn't just, okay, go ride a bike, right? You had somebody that was like, okay, put your feet here, put your hands here, keep your eyes forward, pedal faster, all of those things to help you be successful at the task. Same thing that we do here. I am going to prompt And I'm going to help their body get to the letter so that they can learn the motor skill. I am not testing them in any way, shape, or form, even though, as you will see, my question sounds like their comprehension questions. But I'm prompting, and sometimes prompting can be like, okay, so what are we talking about today, right? And that's a question, and the lesson that we're gonna do is on soccer. Okay, so I'm gonna put the board down with the S, and they go here. Okay, so I'm going to go over, so I'm gesturing, and I'm giving them a verbal direction. So the gestures are for their eyes, because remember, you go back to eyes, and if they can't get their eyes to the letter, they're going to 100% miss it. So we need to get their eyes to the letter. So if they're over in the Z or the V side of the board, then that's where they're going to poke, over here. I need to get them over to the S. So I'm working their eyes to get there. I'm not pointing at the letter, I'm pointing at the direction that the letter's in. So I kind of divide the board into 4. So my gestures are like, okay, go get it all the way over. And then same with W, same with Z, and then up here and V. So I'm wiggling my finger, I'm just getting their eyes to that vicinity so they can, oh, there it is, okay, S, got it, and they're back. Go for it.
Do you do the directionals also? The left or just right?
Great question. I do not, because I don't know left and right solid enough. Like, that's where it's like left, right. Yeah, it's not going to be a good idea. But I have some that do, and it's great. So totally you can do it. Yeah. Depending on the communication partner, yes. That would be me. So I usually say over, back, next door, up, down. Those are all directional prompts to help them, okay? So again, you're riding a bike, somebody's helping you prompt to be successful to ride the bike, and then obviously you know how to ride a bike, you don't continue with the prompts. So the same thing goes with here. We're fading the prompts out as soon as the speller does not need them. But now we're gonna increase the motor demand, and we're gonna go up to this board, which if you went from training wheels to no training wheels, you're now all of a sudden going to need some more prompts because this is different. This is what happens here. So I'm going to start prompting again to get the motor going, to get so now we have the full alphabet on the board. Often it's the communication and regulation partner, or CRP, that has the most difficulty changing boards. It seems like, oh, I wish the letters were all on one board, it would be so easy. And then you do it, and then it's like, whoa, wait a minute, where are all the letters on here? So it takes practice for both the communication partner and the speller. And then once we move from there, and we're very accurate on here, then we have the laminate, what we call the laminate board. And this is where we don't have necessarily, some of my spellers still use a pencil, but usually it's just the finger, and we're just pointing on with the finger. That's why the motor and the sensory, the spatial awareness, we've gotten so good that we can just use our finger and point. We also introduced the delete button up here, and then done or enter, because the transition from here is the keyboard. And it's just, this is the keyboard I use with my spellers. Regular Apple keyboard, nothing special, something that I actually use it when I'm at home working as well. So the question always comes, okay, well, Dana, this is ABC order. This is QWERTY. Doesn't matter, your kids have seen QWERTY keyboards for years. They know a QWERTY keyboard, okay? That's never a problem. And the other reason why is because their motor skills are so good by now that this transition is not a difficult one. And by the way, once we get to here and here, I am not, my gestural prompt is non-existent. My hand is down. I'm not giving them any more prompts gesturally. And I'm also not saying up, up, over, next door, down, because by then their motor skills are so good that this is now them. This is when we can get to those questions like, tell me, how's school today? What do you want to do this afternoon? Have a conversation between their sister and them. I am not saying anything in terms of directing their bodies, because that's what's called influencing. That's then my conversation that I want them to spell. That, like words that I want them to spell, nope, I can't. I am just, it's all them at this point. And when we go, and I'll explain this next, we'll jump into this because this will be helpful to put this together. So we have a motor hierarchy, which is the boards. Now, the cognitive hierarchy. These are the questions. Every single practice session that I do in clinic, that Dina does here, and that you as parents or practitioner or communication partners would do at home, it always involves a lesson, okay? Now, a lesson is learning about a new topic. Sorry, that's so small, I know. I'm gonna go through it, so we'll be able to see it. Just wanna find one with, here we go. Okay, so a lesson is learning about a new topic, and this one is called Sylvester Stallone, More Than a Pretty Face. So this is about Sylvester Stallone, okay? I learned so much from these lessons, by the way. I had no idea that he had all these kids and that he sold his dog for the movie Rocky, and then he sold her for $20, and then he had to buy it for $25,000 back, and that's the dog that's in the movie. It's fascinating. Anyways, this is what we're teaching, that like things like that, where you're like, literally, holy cow, I had no idea. He also has a child with autism. Didn't know that either. Anyways, so the cognitive hierarchy are the lesson type, or the question types, excuse me, okay? So the spell words, the lowest cognitive demand. So I would say, to warm up, we're gonna spell, and this is after, so I'm gonna read a section, just so you're familiar with how this works. So the title of the lesson, Sylvester Stallone, More Than a Pretty Face. When we think of Sylvester Stallone, we think of his great action roles, boxer Rocky Balboa, and Vietnam War veteran John Rambo. But there's more to this recognizable actor. Also a writer, director, and producer. His career spans 4 decades and is still going strong. But it is his origin, or the point at which something arises, story, and determination to succeed that makes him so fascinating and a real inspiration. Now, I would do this with a 10-year-old, I would do this with a 7-year-old, I would do this with a 25-year-old, I would do this with, it's all age-appropriate content, you know, things that parents look at me like I have 2 heads. And I have spellers that are under the table crying, that are over across my room, that are looking at pictures, that are on their parents' lap and talking, and I'm still reading away, and parents are like, shh, you gotta listen. I'm like, they're listening. They're listening to everything. Because they get up into the spelling chair and they crush it every single time. And parents are like, I don't even remember. I'm like, that's because your brain is different. And it's like those aha moments. And so many times it's like parents will be like trying desperately to remember the answer. And they do not remember it. And I'm like, that's because you can't multitask, and that's because you know, it's all part of the learning experience for everybody. So then what I would do after I read that, I would say, okay, we're gonna spell some words. Let's spell the word action, okay? So the first one, give them the one with the A on it, so they're gonna poke A. I'm like, okay, A, and then they poke C, and we continue, okay? Then I would say, we're gonna spell veteran. And then decade. And this is kind of like the warm-up. Lowest cognitive demand, I'm telling them the word to spell. I'm helping them to actually spell it on these boards, okay? The next level of demand would be known questions, okay? Notice I say demand and not cognitive level. Because demand is like what we have to do cognitively to remember and to understand and to apply. Cognitive level implies, okay, kindergarten level, 1st grade level, 2nd grade level. So cognitive demand are known questions. So the first one is, who are we talking about today? One possible answer to these questions, okay? I'm not telling the answer. That's why the cognitive demand is a little bit higher. And then same thing, I'm gonna give them the board with the appropriate letters on it to spell, okay? Then the next cognitive demand are what we call semi-open questions. Now, semi-open questions are ones that have more than one answer, but still are finite. So I have a finite number of answers. So this one would be, give me one of the other jobs that I listed Stallone does besides acting. Anybody want to remember? What was it? Well, you guys are collectively, you guys all need to work together on this one. Writing, writes, directs, produces. Okay, so there's 3 options. Well, I need to be on the 26 board because I can't, hold all 3 boards at the same time to figure out which one they want to say. I want them to pick. I don't want to pick which one. So they have to have their motor skills practice to be able to be on this board to then go to W, P, or D. Yes?
Do you correct your spelling? Do they spell wrong?
So correct, okay, so the reason why they misspoke, so let's say they go to C instead of D for direct, or they go to H, or they go to E, or they go to N, right? It's not because they don't know D, it's because their body can't get to D, meaning they can't get their eyes and their body to go hit D. So then, if they're hitting H, then I'm gonna say up, 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 so that their eyes can get to D, and then they can go ahead and poke D.
Okay, so on a bigger board, you're spelling out Sylvester. Obviously, they're not all on the board.
Correct.
So are you automatically changing? when
Yes.
it comes to it? Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you for asking that. I want to make sure that this is making sense to everybody. Okay, so yes, if I'm spelling Sylvester, I'm giving them the appropriate board. I'm taking it away, giving them another one, taking it away, giving another one. Okay. So the semi-open questions, they need to have they need to have the 26 board, meaning they need to have really good motor skills to be able to get on this board to be accurate. We want them to be accurate as possible. They're still going to mispoke. When we type, we mistype, mishit a key all the time, right? So it's no big deal. That's a motor thing for you. It's a motor thing for them also. So we need then to help them to get their bodies, meaning their eyes and their hands, to the letter. Okay, and then after that, we have previous knowledge questions, and we have math. I didn't include math here. Previous knowledge questions are something that the speller would know based off of their experience in the world and their age, but I did not directly teach it in the lesson. So every single question up until now, the known and the semi-open questions, are based on the information that I taught them. So again, presuming competence, I believe that when I read something to them, they're understanding it, it's age appropriate, obviously, and that they can learn. So then the questions that I'm going to ask them are based on what I taught them. Previous knowledge questions are one step higher in terms of the cognitive demand, because it's not necessarily something that I taught, or it's not what I taught, but it is something that they may have been exposed to. So for example, in the next section that I would read, after we spelled a little bit, I'm going to read about how Sylvester Stallone has the droopy visage, which I'm not going to read it. You guys have to get the lesson to do it. So the blue question would be, what is the nerve? When a nerve is severed, it would cause what to the part of the body it is connected to? Anybody want to take a guess? So I'll read it again. When a nerve is severed, it would cause what to the part of the body it is connected to? Did I hear it? That was close. Paralysis. Okay? Many, if not all of my spellers have got that like this. So that obviously higher cognitive demand, because it's not something I directly taught. They have to pull in terms of other experience and other things that they've learned. And then we have what we call open-ended questions. And this is where everybody wants to get to, because it is something that isn't taught, that I have no idea, because it's what they want to say. It's their own answer. And their motor skills have to be so good on here where they're not making very many mistakes, if any at all, and I'm not gesturing anymore, because as soon as I take the gesture away, and as soon as I take the up, 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 over, over, we're going to see an increase in the motor demands. They're going to have to be like, they're not I'm not helping them as much. It's almost like riding the bike. Right now, I'm not holding their seat anymore. okay? Now they're having to push harder so that they gain momentum to keep going, otherwise they're gonna fall over. It's essentially the same thing. I'm pulling back on my prompts. Now they can just keep going and go with it. They're gonna make a few more mistakes, no big deal, we'll help that, but it's gonna then practice, get there. So this is an example of a pink question where I'm not gesturing, I'm not giving any directional prompts. Stallone has his signature snarl. What would you say is your signature that sets you apart? The answers are phenomenal, by the way. But that's the highest cognitive demand, okay? And it's the highest motor demand. And so the reason why I don't start with a keyboard, because I have parents and educators like look at me like, have you not heard of technology? Like, your plastic stencil boards, like what's happening here? And I go back to the motor, right? The motor demand between this board and this board is huge. And so you can't get everything and hold it in your head as far as your response and get it out when the motor demand is like this. You're gonna spell cat because you practice cat all day, every day, or entering your YouTube, whatever that is. You know, I have experts on YouTube searches with so many of my clients, so they can navigate YouTube like on the back of their hand. But if you look at what they're entering in, it's something they practiced over and over and over again, or it's something that they're copying from. Which, if they're copying something and inputting it on a keyboard, that cognitive demand is super low because it's right there. They can look and then back and forth, right? But when the cognitive demand is high, like tell me one thing that you love about school, right? Okay, one thing, that seems simple, but, and then you give them a keyboard, that's a high cognitive demand, a high motor demand. Dysregulation is gonna happen, or they'll go back to spelling cat, and then you're like, you don't understand my question, right? So we have to build that. It's all about the motor, because that's the issue. It's not cognitive, it's their motor. Okay. Gotta coordinate myself here. Let's go with this. Okay. Evidence. So there is a number of resources. Many of the things that I talk about with respect to the motor, Elizabeth Torres, this is her book, that is a heavy read, very scientific based, but amazing in terms of what she's researching. So she's essentially the guru of looking at the brain-body disconnect in those with autism. And so this book, like I said, is really full of much of her research, and I have worked with her in the past, and we put together a presentation. It's there at the bottom. It says Elizabeth Torres, so that's her book. And then we did a presentation together. We've done a number of podcasts together because her brain is up here in terms of the content, and she speaks like neurological speak. And everybody's like, that's awesome, but I want to know from like the lay person and like myself. So what we've done is I kind of translate as that I can. And she's amazing. She's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. But I said to her, I'm like, we have to make this applicable to parents, otherwise, and educators and everybody, because this is where it's at. This is the issue. I have spellers that will say, I don't have autism. I have a movement issue. I have apraxia. That's how they see it. And everybody's different. But that is how they see it, is like, it's affecting my entire life, from speaking to doing what I want to do every day to, all of this. That's the issue. And so one of my things that I'm doing is working, in the community to help educators. And it's tough. This is a difficult thing because to change an education system, I don't think it's gonna happen in my lifetime. I mean, it could, but it's like, I have had in Grace, that some of you know, she decided, she was at Invictus for a while, and then she's like, nope, I wanna go to public school, I wanna graduate, typical diploma, in the classes, I wanna do it all, and then go to college. So Grace did that, and we had to navigate the system. And there was a lot of tears shed on everybody's part, including myself, because it was difficult. Now, thankfully, we had amazing support at the district level, and they saw this and they believed in it. It was more navigating those who were like, so when I'm talking to parents who come to see me, and they'll come in from, I see parents from all over like families, they come from all over the US, and they come in and they're like, okay, so do you think that they can do it? I'm like, yes, I know they can do it. Well, this is kind of just a trial, just to see. I'm like, okay. So we do it, and then they sit there on the last day, and they're like, okay, so what do we do now? Because coming here, we were thinking one thing. Now we know, now what do we do going back? Like, what about school? They could be in more of like an ABA type center, or they could be in a public school, autism setting, classroom. Like, what do we do? You were reading these lessons, and she's clearly understanding about, like, now what? And it's a process. It goes back to communication with your speller and saying, look, we're gonna work on this. This isn't the end point of where you're at. You know, I'm gonna do what I can to help support you and give you the content you need, but right now you're in this class, in this school, whatever. The change in the speller, just knowing that you get it and that you're working on a process to help them is unbelievable. And so it's something that then they will then go, okay, I can do this. I know that there's something out there that I can look forward to. And so with Grace, she completed, and as some of you know, is now up at Belmont in Tennessee. And it's a group effort. I mean, it is, her mom is her main communication and regulation partner, or CRP. The reason why we have the R in there is because my job isn't just to hold this board. It's to know the speller so well that I can support their regulation. Because when you and I are dysregulated, anxious, you know, our motor skills are not good at all. Think about driving, you know, in the middle of a new city in a snowstorm or a rainstorm, you're like, turn the radio down, nobody talk, and you're like this. Your anxiety's up here. You don't want to make a mistake. The same thing is with our spellers. If they're coming in and they're anxious, like I have my one friend, Angelo, who's going to be coming in to do some live Q&A, and he's going to be spelling with me. And it's like, you know, you standing up in front of an audience, like you're going to be anxious, and it's going to be like, nah. And the spellers are the same. It takes a little bit. So my job with Angelo is to, my energy has to be down here. And our spellers, they're experts at reading people's energy. They walk into a room, Angela walking into this room will feel everybody's energy. And that's part of the dysregulation piece too. Or, you know, why does he want to leave? He just got here. He said that he wanted to come here. Like, what's going on? We don't have that ability. We don't feel everybody's energy. We can kind of tell if we interact with them. But these guys can feel that coming into the room. So that's part of my job as a regulation partner, is to help regulate. So when I'm coaching parents and I'm like, okay, so let's not do this if you had a horrible day at work and you're coming in and you're like, I gotta check this off my list because we gotta practice. No, it's better to wait until, and parents know this. I mean, it's just what you do with all your kids too. You know, your reaction to them, you're gonna have a longer fuse or a shorter fuse depending on how your day was. The same thing is with your speller. Okay, so yes, we have some studies up there. United for Communication Choice.org, which is in the published studies section. If you go to that website, there are like at least 100 studies that pertain to spelling in some way, whether it's looking at the motor, whether it's looking at the eyes, where it's a lot there. So that is also something that I didn't list, obviously, all of them on here. And then finally, locally, so Dina, as you know, is just finishing up her practitioner training, which is fantastic for all of you that are here. And then it says Tampa. The reason why it says Tampa is because I usually have this slide for national or international talks. So, but I am actually in Trinity or Tarpon Springs area, if you're not familiar with Trinity. So I have a clinic over there, and other resources, so empowered2.net, that's what I was talking about early on with my colleague and I. We have a ton of videos, many of the podcasts, and talks and webinars and seminars that I've done are listed there. Of course, her website is Transcending Apraxia, which also has resources. IAS.org, which is the International Association for Spelling is Communication. They have resources. And then there's a couple of other talks on YouTube videos. Okay. All right, so questions? Yes.
Okay. I have a friend who had adopted a child in China, and he has difficulties with motor skills. He also has some apparent brain damage. Would you be able to test someone like that to find out if a lot of his issues are really motor rather than
Cognitive or something like the
Yes.
traumatic brain. So I will always welcome anybody in my clinic, no matter what. It's an autism. I have kids with autism and adults with autism, with Down syndrome, with various apraxias, with genetic diagnoses that don't actually have a name, complex motor. So I'm never going to say no, because we really don't know his cognitive ability, right? Yeah, and I mean, as far as like getting from here to here, and keep in mind that I have, like Angelo, when he comes in, we may use this board because remember, in like added anxiety, the motor control is going to be less. So we tend to kind of go down a level on the motor, or a demand on the motor, so that it's easier for them to kind of balance out their regulation. But he primarily uses this board. He doesn't always use the keyboard, and he's like, if I have to write an essay for school, this is a lot less taxing than this would be, because of the motor demand. So, once you have 26 letters, you can say whatever you want, right? It's not something that it's not like, oh, you get the gold star if you get to the keyboard. But some of my spellers are like, I want to get to the keyboard. Not only do I want to get to the keyboard, but I want to get to independent typing, which is when we start the keyboard on a stand. And when I'm using the keyboard, I'm always Bluetoothing it to an iPad. And I happen to have Proloco for text, which is like the speech generator device. So they will type, and as soon as they press enter, it will speak for them. So some like that because it's not done. My job is really just to hold the board. And they can have a conversation between somebody else and them. But some of them want to do more independent typing, and so I have a stand for the keyboard that goes here, and then another stand for the iPad, which is up here. And their ocular motor skills have to be so good that they can switch back and forth, and they have to have that control. So the motor demand of typing is exponentially high. So not everybody wants to do that just because it's so high. But to be honest, when you meet spellers, they're like, I want to speak. Okay, let's do it. Let's work to it. Let's do it. I'm never going to say, you don't have any speech now. I don't think you're going to do that. No, I'm never going to say it. They want to say, I want to be independent, flat keyboard. I want to go to college. Awesome, let's do it. Let's do it. So, and I do have some that are working on speech. When we work on motor skills as a whole, that motor cortex that we were talking about earlier, we're addressing the motor. Speech is motor. I do have like my unreliable speaker. Hi, Miss Dana, how are you this morning? Guy. He now spells that his speech is actually more reliable because this is a motor skill. We practice motor skills. Is it something where I see, a non-speaker now all of a sudden starting to become conversational? No. But it's something where the unreliable speakers have more reliable speech, which is great for them. Yes?
You mentioned the YouTube. He'll take a picture of something he wants to look it up, and he'll type it up so it will come up. And he does the other, so you see.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're around him a long time, you don't understand. And he's 42 at this point. Do you feel that there might be something that can help? Because I'm not sure how much letters he knows.
Mm-hmm. So my oldest that ever came in was, and I'll tell you about this experience. So mom called me and said, my daughter, I want to try this. If you have not read the book Underestimated, I need to add that to my list. I don't know why it's not on that slide. Underestimated by J.B. and Jameson Hanley. It is their experience of, Jamie is now 20. Just had a birthday. So he is now 20, and it talks about, JB, talks about his experience early on and everything they did, and then having another parent call him and say, you gotta do this, and he's like, he doesn't know his letters, like, what are you talking about? No, you just gotta go do it. And he did, and Jamie's actually the one that we're working on independent typing because he wants to go to college and he wants to speak. And he now is like, this is my goal, and I want everybody to be able to have access to this. So if you haven't read that, that's one. Underestimated, J.B. Handley, Handley, and Jameson, or Jamie, is his son. So with respect to, does he know his letters? I feel 100% that he knows his letters. My family that came in read that book, and she called me and she's like, we have to try this. My daughter's 56 at the time. What do you think? And I'm like, absolutely, come on in. So I went out to the waiting room to meet them, and mom and dad were seated in the corner, and she was at the door screaming her head off that she didn't want to do this. And when I have like a 4-year-old standing at the door screaming, that's one thing. But when you have a 56-year-old woman screaming at the door, it's like people, and I'm like, no big deal, we got this. Went, got my boards, went and literally sat in the door jamb. And I'm like, ready? We're gonna spell. We did this. She came in, we sat in the waiting room, and then she was in and came into my room that we spell, and now she's open, now she's 58, and she's attending her church like she wants to. She's bilingual, and that was, she didn't have to be taught. Many, if not all of my spellers know multiple languages, and I attribute that to, just families come from different backgrounds and may speak different languages. So if you've ever been told that don't speak your native language because that's going to confuse, that is a big lie. And actually speech therapists will also say that, some, not all, but that is absolutely not true. And then when I say this, the parents are like, oh, well, that's why they're watching YouTube in German. Yes. Now, I can't communicate in multiple languages, so that's where, but I've had interns that have come, like I had this one come from Brazil. She was from Brazil. And I said, why don't you do a lesson with one of my spellers in Portuguese? And it was the most regulated that speller had ever been. She crushed it. Her parents were like, the heck? But she's a YouTube, and she just, she's 11, gonna be 12, so she's had years of, we do not pay attention very well, by the way. So this is just kind of like, we don't, well, I never formally taught. He was never formally taught. I'm like, you're right, but that doesn't mean he doesn't know. So going back to your, There's another question.
I was just wondering about fees for the testing, and is it insurance covered? I'm just curious for families that are
Yep, so for me, I'm an OT, and so this is considered assistive technology, or AAC. My clinic does not take insurance directly, but I have multiple OTs who are also practitioners, including myself, who we will then bill and put the billing and coding information onto our invoices so that you could submit, or they could submit to insurance. The other thing is there's a number of families that have Gardner, or that I'm a Gardner provider, our clinic's a Gardner provider. Also CDC Plus, which is the over 22, I believe. I am a provider for CDC Plus, so that's also an option for those of you who have that.
Are you a direct pay provider to Gardner, or do you have to pay any
Direct pay, I'm direct pay, yes. Yeah, easy, really easy that, yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. My son has Apraxia, and he is 6.5, and he falls in what we call probably the gray area here, where he can speak, he knows all of his letters,
all give, we can all take. So for someone like that who is still, you know, but closing letters are hard, or like making K or a G is pretty non-existent. So how would this be applicable to still someone like him who would be on the high functioning end of Apraxia, and you know, he can ride a scooter, he can ride a bike, he can hit a golf, you know, it's pretty functional, but still there are gaps to fill. How would that work in this?
So we have a couple students at school that are apraxic, and literally it's apraxia, childhood apraxia of speech, which
Yeah,
CAS.
and like, he doesn't have any other diagnosis or needs.
And so both of them spell, and both of their motor ability has improved significantly. So it is where even the unreliable speakers, like my Good Morning Miss Dana one, he in school will put up his hand and answer if it's like a short answer, but because he has so much more that he wants to say, it is an option if he so chooses to then elaborate, which he can't do that through his speech, but because this is more gross motor than speech is, he has the ability to do that. So my one child CAS client or student, he came in with pro lo quo, and he'll use that still for like, I need to go to the bathroom, you know, or things that need to be quick, right? And we never said no, he couldn't. He rarely uses it anymore, honestly, and he's fluent on the board, and that's what he chooses. The other thing is he will say some of the words as he's spelling them, and we never like push that because that's double motor, right? The motor demand, actually triple with the eyes, the mouth, and pointing. So we don't push that, but that's just happened because of it. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So non-verbal IQ testing, where is that applied? Does that even exist as an IQ for these guys?
It still requires motor,
Right.
right? So it's really not, I mean, any IQ test, and I have families that say to me all the time, you know, cognitive delayed, his IQ's 40 and all, I'm like, that's great, come on. Yeah.
Okay, and then also, I've got a speech pathology, I'm not sure degree, but it's because I stuck. And has stuttering ever been explored as under Apraxia?
Great question. I can't speak to stuttering specifically. I have, totally, right? It makes sense. Absolutely.
When you said the energy, I feel your energy. And I got into that anxiety component of things. So I was asking if you would ever explore meds if you had a child. Like, I mean, I know you're not able to do the parents.
For studying, or for stuttering specifically, or just for
students.
Just for students with anxiety. So I mean, my talks to parents as far as the anxiety piece goes, really talks about ways that we can help co-regulate. Totally, yeah. And helping to co-regulate could be, and from think about it from a top-down or a bottom-up, right? So bottom-up would be the sensory piece. Before I started spelling and before I really had my paradigm shift as a professional, is that I was traditional OT. I've always worked with kids, always worked with autism, and really was like sensory integration. That's what I did until I picked up the book, Ito in Autism Land, and he said OT did nothing for me. And I was like, all right, gotta read this, because I'm clearly doing things that aren't right. And he said it wasn't until my mom hired me a trainer so that I could get the purposeful movement along with the sensory of like lifting heavy weights and getting the feedback from that then I started to really regulate, and then I started to become more intentional. And so I literally shifted my clinic from like the swing, the ball pit, like all of this, because again, it's fun, like sure, it's great, I love that too, but completely do the weight. So we do a couple of OTs went and got trained in CrossFit, and so they do a ton of those workouts with our spellers, and you know, for my littles that come in, littles being, you know, I typically start around 4.5, 5. Now, A spelling session for that young isn't going to be, let's sit for 45 minutes, because I had a 6-year-old in last week. It was like, let's spell for 10, and then we went and we did something and come back, and any age, like it has to be age appropriate. So sometimes I have more dysregulated or impulsive clients come in that need more of that bottom up or that sensory piece first. So they need to prep their bodies, and then we can go into spelling. Now, I have others that are fine in terms of the sensory piece, but need more top down. And what I mean by that is the high cognitive input. So I'll have times in some clients where I will put on a TED Talk or a Harvard lecture. I've downloaded all their lecture series for free that they did over COVID. And I'll put it on in the background while we're spelling. And that's enough cognitive input to help keep them regulated. So our students at school, when we get feedback from them, just like I said, the one student needed to be in the opposite classroom for the auditory piece, we've had a couple that they'll wear the Bluetooth headphones, that their lecture series is going, they're sitting at their desk while the teacher's lecturing, and they're typically doing like doodling or something like that, like what we call bodying pager, so engaging their bodies at their desk. And then we put a board down in front of them, they know. They haven't missed a beat. But because they tend to, if you go back to, let's see where that is, this slide. So we're either functioning in our cortical or our subcortical area, right? Well, the impulsivity and dysregulation happens in the lower center, the middle part, the subcortical area of our brain. So what we try and do is keep them thinking and utilizing this. So if I'm listening to something that's high cognitive, I'm going to be thinking about what I'm listening to, so that I have to then shift into my cortical. So it's less fight or flight. So less impulsive, less getting up from the chair, going outside the classroom. I can keep my body in the chair. 100%, yeah. It's just misunderstood in the autistic population, right? Because what we see, totally, 100%. Yeah, it's just what we've been told about autism isn't this. It's what you see on the outside is actually what is happening on the inside, and that's not in any way, shape, or form accurate. Yes. Sorry. Okay.
So curious. I have two on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
One is completely verbal.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a lot of problems with that saying things you need to say or being extremely impulsive, and then always coming back to apologize. You said, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
Would this be relevant to him because he's verbal? I mean, because he's verbal. However, he does a lot of the same things that you're talking about.
Yeah. How is he with back and forth conversations?
It's usually a fight. And it's usually walking turning around the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the dog.
Yep.
He's repeating himself. Oh,
Yep.
the dog is little, the dog is cute. My dog is small. My dog is cute.
Yep. So he's practiced that over and over again. Remember, practice becomes permanent, right? So he's thinking in his head what he really wants to say, and then this comes out of his mouth. This would be perfect for him. I'm sure it would decrease so much of his anxiety. Because like my guy, I mean, he would lose it sometimes. And he's the most chill, like surfer dude kind of guy. And he would still lose it. And he would say it's because I can only take so much of people like not understanding me and my mouth going off, and I don't want it to go off. Yeah. Yep. And there's, absolutely he needs something there. He's so misunderstood. Yeah. I'm sorry, you both.
Thank you. I'm Jose, by the way. I have a son who's 10 years old, and I'm really using this method. I read the book, The Others. In one of the chapters, he mentioned that that he has some pushback from other professionals and educators, I guess, in their state. And what was interesting to me about this method is the pursuit of confidence. So before that, have ADA and a lot of other therapists in this community, they mostly pursuing confidence. And they reduce the level of communication to just reward and punishment. So, and I see the difference in my son. I mean, we started this like 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And I know that he now understands that we trust that he can do it. Now I understand when he's watching something in Spanish or in English, because we knowing that this person puts in the book, you're ready. Some people are going to say, no, this is not what you think, it's going to be okay. With my testimony that it works within my time. So I'm assuming like that.
It's interesting because JB talks about Jamie's school in there, and I actually went out to his school to try and shift things. But it's interesting because to your point, it literally felt like I was being attacked, like walking in there. I mean, nice people, but just like, don't try and tell us anything else. Like it was like their heels were dug in. And I, was prepared for that because that's what they had talked to me about. So, but as far as here in Florida, so I had talked about my experience with Grace, and that was in Pasco County, the district level. And recently we've had a couple of students from Invictus move and shift to, and actually a fellow that wasn't at Invictus, shift to Pinellas County schools. And it's interesting because the director of the ESE program at the district level actually spoke with the director at Pasco, and they're very excited about it. So at that level, and that's what you need to get at that level, right? But then you come in contact with those at the lower levels, including teachers and OT, speech therapy, that kind of thing. And that's where we kind of saw the pushback and experienced the pushback. It's education, and then, it's openness on their part to see and to believe. And you're not, and when I first started this, I was like, all right, I'm on fire for this, and I still am. But it's like, I do whatever I can to educate and to speak to those. And I have been pelted and just like with questions. And I mean, we do this, I do a seminar online, and one of the kind of first questions is like, tell me who you are, where you're from, and a superpower. And I always describe my superpower as being regulated. And it's at the demise of my husband because he'll come around the corner and try and scare me, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. And he's like so upset because I don't jump. Well, it's just, I'm like, right now, I'm not regulated all the time, I'm not gonna be, but because I have to co-regulate so much, it's more of my norm. So with people who then come in all fired up, it's like, I don't wanna be like that. I just wanna have a conversation. So professionals in the area, there's been a number who have come against me because what are you doing this for? This is communication, you're not a speech therapist, because the speech therapists, some are embracing this, others are not. ASHA, which is the American Speech and Hearing Association, has said this isn't adequate, you shouldn't be doing this, this is like, it's being fought, and it's a huge dramatic thing. But it's really put speech therapists into a really bad position because they have to make a choice. They have to choose whether they want to do this. If they're choosing to do this, then they're not going to be able to be associated with that organization, which is horrible. And so there's that kind of thing underlying ABA therapists, like you said, it's the presumption of competence. I know some amazing ABA therapists who are local who actually do feel that this is appropriate, and I love not everyone, but I love a lot of them where they're like, oh, well, can I help? Like, what can I do to like come in team with you rather than against you? And they're really good at task analysis. They're really good at breaking down a task. And that's what needs to happen in order for us to coach the motor and to help build the motor skills in other areas. So not spelling, but like other areas. So I talk with them about that, and they're like, oh yeah, I got this. So we can come together, and that's my goal, but there's always going to be some, but I feel like if, we need more parents, because the more, like I think JB talks about this too, the more parents that get on board and then go to the schools, and we have numbers of professionals that will go in as advocates to support under ADA, because this is assistive technology. This is low-tech AAC, right? Your child has a right to communication in school with AAC. So we don't call it, we keep it more of a general term, like with Grace, it was spelled like a letterboard. We just called it a letterboard or a keyboard. It was letterboard or keyboard. We didn't call it spelling to communicate or, a brand name. And we put it as an option. So letterboard, keyboard, assistive technology device, because that's what it falls under. So there are ways to do it. Jamie went to a private school, and so that was where that fighting took place. It's a possibility. Now, when to approach the school is a whole other topic. So when I have brand new spellers that come in and they're just learning, you will see that they're going to mispoke. They're going to, mess up. They're going to get dysregulated. Remember I said I'm gesturing. I'm prompting them. I don't want to go into the school and say, hey, look, because they're going to go, you're basically telling them every word to spell. How is that? Because they don't have the background that you all just listened to and heard. And so that's where like Grace, she went in and she was using this board. And Angela had her hand down, I had my hand down, and to see multiple communication partners is also a really, really good thing. So it's not just like, oh, mom, mom and Grace, there they are. But it was 3 or 4 people that could do the exact same thing with her. And this was the board that she used with her math symbols on the back. So there's a better time to go in and approach the school with it. We need to get the motor skills down. We need to get things moving first before we kind of bombard people. Is that good? You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just want to thank you for coming here. There's a lot of information, a lot of things to think about. I appreciate what you're talking about as far as connecting, getting the person connected back to you're talking about disconnect. I have a son who's been labeled as who's autistic and labeled as severely impaired, completely nonverbal, and I still kind of think there's, maybe it's harder to test, but there's still a lot of nonverbal intelligence that we all know exists. And so what I'm wondering is, when you started talking initially, you were saying that it's all connection between the brain and the action. But I'm wondering, do you acknowledge that there may be some people that are cognitively people that may be different impairment, maybe there's only so far you can go?
100%. I am not going to say that 100% of autistic people are absolutely cognitively intact. What I will say is out of the hundreds that I've had come in that have been labeled severe, and those terms like low functioning, severe, low nonverbal IQ, I've never had one that has not been able to do this. So I'm sure they're out there, but as far as spelling, or it's.
Did you have was there a spectrum very small
Okay, so and it's really up to the speller if they want to go on the keyboard. I want to get them to the point of what we call open and fluent communication, meaning I can be his communication partner and hold the board, and you can ask him a question, he can respond, you guys have a conversation. That's the goal. If he wants to go to college, then we need to work on things like endurance and stamina, because he's going to have to spell and write an essay or do a test, those kinds of things. So my goal, once you get open, which is, again, having this conversation, I've had all of my spellers, that's what they want to get to. And I haven't had a speller who's gotten stuck at only doing name one of the 2 things that I just mentioned to you. Okay? They've all gotten to, not all of my spellers are there yet, but they're not stopping. They don't just only get to a certain level. They're expressive, like their written expression. What's really, really cool is that you start to see their personalities, and you start to see the way in which they speak. Because we all have certain words that we say frequently, we all have ways in which we speak, they do as well. And goodness, they can be sarcastic, they can be angry, they can be, and again, angry, yet they're smiling the whole time. You know, I was in San Diego last week, and I had a spellers panel, and one of the questions was about, actually it was with Maddie, who was up there. Somebody had asked her about her experience in school, and she was smiling away as she's typing on the keyboard, and her mom, or she pressed enter, and then it, you know, it speaks for her, and it just, she was like, I was so angry, they wouldn't let me, you know, have access to age appropriate, like all this stuff, and a parent commented after, and it was like, you'd never know, because we're so used to, for all of us, if you're smiling, I'm thinking that you're happy, or you're, you know, whatever that would associate in terms of your body language. But it's not the case at all, at all. Yes?
I think I could give a little bit of hope. My daughter was a high school English teacher in Riverview. She teaches at a charter school. And a parent had, I'm not familiar like with high functioning autism, you know what I mean? But she said he was high functioning, but still had this whole issue of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And this student wanted to do this, like wanted to be in these classes, wanted to try.
Mm-hmm.
And our daughter Rebecca works with a student with this method because she went to USF,
Mm-hmm.
got her English degree from there.
Mm-hmm.
Went to this school, she taught for 2 years. Her last year, the student came in, and she kind of evaluated, and she was like, sure, we'll give it a try. So they set him up. He was in the front of the room, had his own, he used the keyboard,
Mm-hmm.
had an iPad. He passed the class. She said he wrote some of the best essays
Yep.
that could have ever been written by any of those students. And he got a 5 on his AP exam.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not familiar with a lot of like what goes on with the, you know, the autism and all of that. But I called her last night to let her know. I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to this with my friend, and so I can learn a little bit more. And she was like, Mom, I used that with my student. He had a 5 on his AP exam. She went with him to take the test because, you know, it's a time test. And she worked with him on words and ideas, and she actually accompanied him to the test because he couldn't go by himself because of the whole
They use, yeah.
thing, you know, getting all worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I talked to him before we went in that room and told him, you go in and you do your thing. And he went in and wrote, they had 3 topics. She gave him the topics ahead of time of like what they had to write on. They allowed her to do that. And he went in and she got his test scores back 2 weeks ago. You know, 5 on that AP. You got college credit.
Yeah.
So there's hope.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's huge. It's those kinds of things that we need to hear, because yes, there's hope. One of the things that I was going to mention too is we talk and I help educate, because we tend to say terms like high functioning, low functioning, right? And now that we know about the motor parts, because when we think low functioning, you think cognitive is typically what you're thinking. But we usually say high support needs or low support needs. That's kind of what I will talk with educators about in terms of IEP and working with parents that way. High support needs and low support needs.
And she corrected me.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
No, she did though. She was like, Mom, that's not what we do.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I know, I never want to bring it up.
Daughter took it to the next step.
Yeah.
She just did, you know, when she got her English major, it was just a God thing how he led her to the job that she has and the school that she's at. And so now they are going to move to put more children with her who want to do this because she just it's a natural.
Mhm.
She's got that, connection with the kids. And, she has a heart for teaching, and I think that that's just really where everything lies.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a heart for it, and it doesn't matter what the student can do or cannot do, you still have to love the student
Yeah.
and take them to where you think they can go,
Mhm.
and she did, so there's hope.
Absolutely, and I think when I have parents that ask me like, well, what can I talk to my teacher about, or what can I have them do, or even at home, when they come to see me, I'm coaching a parent before they leave and go back home. But then there's other parents, obviously, that still need to wait, and the reason why we don't coach like 5 people at one time is like if you're learning a new skill, you don't learn from 5 different coaches or 5 different teachers. That would be very difficult. And so when I have a speller that starts with me and kind of builds the skills to get going, and then I have a parent or another CRP who's never done this before, so their motor skills aren't up to par, they have to work to get their dance going, so to speak. And then once the spellers got really good experience, then they'll be able to tolerate a brand new dance partner a lot easier than just all 5 at one time. So that's kind of the system as far as coaching. But they'll ask me like, what can I do then, and what can the teachers do, and even therapists. And I'll say like, well, there's 2 things that I feel need to happen with anybody that's supporting your child. The one is presuming competence, right? And unfortunately, if you ask any therapist, well, do you presume competence? They're not going to say no, because that's really rude. They're going to say, yes, of course I do, right? And then they turn and they do like Old MacDonald with a 15-year-old to try and, get, because that's what they like. So it's like, no, presuming competence and really understanding what that means, and then understanding the motor and apraxia. When I say motor, I mean our body's ability to move and the connection, intentional movement. We have to understand apraxia and how it relates to our kids, and the reason why one day they can do it, 1 hour they can do it, the next hour, the next minute they can't. And with apraxia, it's consistently inconsistent. And so that's what makes data collection very difficult. And when it comes to those professions that take a lot of data, it's frustrating for the kid because they did it and then now they're not. And so now we have to do it over again and do it over again and do it over again. And so you can understand why that would be very frustrating. I typically get a question related to, well, my 25-year-old loves watching Thomas the Tank Engine, right? Like that's on the iPad, like they're typing in Thomas the Tank Engine, or, they love Elmo, or like what, that's not, I'm presuming competence. So what should they do with that? Like why? Like, is that something I should take away? Is it something that I should? And I'm like, no, I think that what my suggestion is, because that can be a very like regulation thing. And so when that happens, it's like, I never want to take something away. I want to add something though. I suggest, well, on TV, let's put on the History Channel, or let's put on a documentary that's age appropriate, or some show that's age appropriate that feeds their brain. And we know they're going to listen. And eventually that Thomas the Tank Engine may only be used for when they're dysregulated, and they can actually put that down because now this is way more interesting. So we see those shifts, but I always relate it to like at Christmas time, you'll catch me watching all the Christmas cartoons because of the nostalgia, and it makes me feel comfort and like all of that. So I kind of think of it that way. So, I don't ever want to, unless the speller says to me, I do not want this. That's a whole different thing, because now they're telling me I don't want it. But because this process, and Jamie in the book, he talks about how he practiced every day. He got, to open in a relatively short period of time, meaning from the day that he started on the 3 boards to the day that he openly answered a question was about 8 months. I typically say about a year on average to get to that point. Now, I've had spellers that have gotten there in about 3 months. I've had spellers who have more complex motor. It's taken 2 years. So, but parents never give up because they see each day there's more and they're gonna get there. So it's something that is not where they're coming to see me. Now, we do have families that come each week to see our practitioners, and they work with them and they coach parents. Parent coaching is almost every session after the practitioner kind of starts, and then we get right in there with the parents. This is a parent-driven program. This is parents do it because as much as I love your child, I don't want to be everyone's communication partner. I can't. And I want parents to empower parents to be able to do this with their child because that they're constant. You know, then let's pull in a nanny, or then let's pull in another therapist, but first the parent needs to get that to that point. So question, Elizabeth?
You've kind of been answering this a little bit through past discussions, but what I'm considering and wanting to ask is, what can be done in a complementary way in order to fortify what they're doing? Because like you said, especially some children get into work, assisted individuals get into their church, if we have a session, maybe 30 minutes or an hour a week, or maybe 2 a week, what can be done to really support that? And
Yep.
maybe we go through a little faster, or maybe not, but still be able to support and.
So parents, like I said, get on the board really quickly. So you're practicing spelling at home, and I mean, I always like perfect world, right? And parents are like, well, how often should I? And I usually say something like, well, you didn't become an Olympian by practicing once a week, right? Like, it's a motor skill. This is what you're doing, is practicing a motor skill. So if you want to get good at something, the more you practice, the more. But life, other kids, you know, school, everything else, right? So, and we need to find a time that's going to work for both the child and the parent. And it can, I start parents off 15, 20 minutes a day. They'll come in to see us for an hour, but we're also experienced practitioners. You guys are just learning. So 15, 20 minutes and we build up. And if it's 3 times a week, 1 week, totally fine. It's just what, you know, you can do. Now, outside of that is feed your child's brain. Put on podcasts, put on audiobooks that are age appropriate, put on, instead of, you know, even music is great. I'm not like, I like listening to music. But when I say feed your brain, I am saying give them content. They want something to listen to. That top-down, remember I said regulation, top-down regulation. It's amazing to see the regulation support that something that they're listening to is helping. They're not going to sit and listen. Listen doesn't have a look. We've created that look, but when they don't look like they're listening, they're still listening. So they may be in another room when you put that on, you know, the computer, the TED Talk on the computer, and they go to their room, they're still listening. So first thing is feeding their brain. The second thing is purposeful motor work, meaning intentional. They don't have chores, and their age is they're supposed to have chores around the house. They need to have chores around the house. They're not going to be able to do it like, okay, go take out the trash necessarily. They may need help every step of the way, but we need to help practice the intentional motor movement. So those are the 2 things that I say that you can do outside of practicing spelling on a daily basis, is constantly feeding the brain and working on the intentional motor. Okay, I've been told that I have to stop. I'm sorry, I could keep going, but I could.
And I really would love you to keep going, but we also have people waiting to Zoom in.
Oh, yes.
Speller,
Okay.
I think, waiting to join
Yeah.
us. But maybe we can answer some questions afterwards.
So what I will do is we'll start with Angelo and then I'll shift over to Grace. So one of the questions that I asked them was, how has life changed for you now that you have a reliable way to communicate? And Angelo said, I am so happy now that I'm able to use letter and spell to communicate my complete thoughts. I began to spell in May of 2021, and I was less than 3 months away from being 16 years old. I always thought I would be doomed to a speechless life and mental captivity. I am no longer living a life governed by what my body says. Now I live a life dictated by what my mind is thinking. Will my body cooperate by spelling my thoughts on the letterboard. Awesome. And then Grace. Okay.
Can you hear us at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Grace, I asked Grace how life has changed for her now that she has a reliable way to communicate, and she spelled, now that I'm able to communicate, I'm able to emotionally connect with my parents. I'm also able to communicate my intelligence.
Thank you, Grace.
She wasn't as loquacious as Angela, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so many of these parents are brand new to spelling. What is one thing that you would like to tell them as they start to spell with their child? Angela said, one thing to remember is always presume confidence in your child's mental and physical abilities, no matter their stubborn motor actions. Great. Sorry,
feedback. Okay.
The second question, many of the parents are brand new. Does she have an answer for that one? Okay, no, you're muted.
She was, wow, 2 college degrees, and here we go with this. All right, one thing she wanted to tell new parents is she says, she spelled, do not give up no matter how hard it is. It's worth all the effort to give your child a voice.
Thank you. The next one is, what is one thing that you would like to tell new spellers as they begin their S2C journey? And Angela said, I'm praying for you all. I have no doubt you are able and more than willing to crush S2C and all the challenges you may face along the way.
All right, said, it is hard, but I promise it is worth it. There will be times when your body fails you, but don't give up. It will change your life completely.
Yes.
Background with Grace. So I've known Grace when she was 2. She was actually my first client at All Children's Hospital when I moved to Florida. And I remember the day Angela brought her in. She had the spiral line. She still has it. Gets it from her mom. And she came in, and I will say I did everything wrong with Grace. As an OT, everything. And Grace and I have had our conversation about this, and she and I, yes, had a heart-to-heart, because when I learned what was really happening and why, I completely shifted, and that was after I left All Children. So I had left there and started my own practice, and actually Grace and her family moved away. But Angela was always, kept in touch with me, and would ask questions, and we'd always, stay connected. And then Grace came to Invictus, but actually right before that, Grace and Landon, when I first learned about S2C, Landon and Grace were the kids that I thought, oh, this is going to. And so I met with Angela, and we started out with Grace, and then we started with Grace, and then we also worked with Landon. And Grace now is just, she's at Belmont University, but she's just been a trailblazer. She was the first one in Pasco County to go to regular high school and participate in class, take AP classes, graduating in Canada we don't have those terms. Like, what did she graduate in?
Magna cum laude, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So, and now she's at Belmont. So I cannot tell you how proud I am of her. I also know how hard her body works, because Grace and I would get into it sometimes. And she would tell me how she felt, and I'd be like, you can do this. I know it's hard, but we got it. And her mom, and her dad, she spells with Tim as well, have worked really hard to get where they are. So I'm so glad, Grace, that you mentioned the amount of work it takes, because it looks and sounds on the outside without actually seeing it. Oh, this is like just put a board up in front. It is not in any way. And so this is who Grace is a little artist. So, yes.
And she, by the way, while you were saying that, she spelled, it's okay, Dana.
And this is the thing, these spellers are the most patient and the most forgiving people you will ever meet. Because some of them haven't had a voice until they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And they're like, okay, now I have a voice, let's do this. And we are the ones that just, we do I feel horrible, but it's part of what drives me every day. Just knowing that they are in the entire world is amazing. Okay, so Angelo, tell me about your future goals. He said, I plan to graduate high school and attend Ivy League University, in which I will double major in neuroscience and molecular biology and pave the way for non-speakers all over the world. I plan on doing all of this despite Apraxia.
Wait till you're muted.
Oh.
I think there's me making the feedback. We're trying to talk on the same. Anyway, Grace said that her future goals are also to graduate from college with a degree. She just changed her major from biology to neuroscience and contribute to society.
Okay, so now we want to open it up for anybody who has questions for Angelo and Grace.
How does this look in college for Grace, who is helping her? Is she still using the?
So Grace, the question was, how does this look in college for you as a speller? Like, are you using the letterboard? What does that look like?
Sorry, Grace, there you go. Grace said, I am using
Word T.
the
Word T.
Here you go. B, and O, and A, and on. I'm using the letterboard. Go ahead. Yep. All the way. In classes. What does that look like in college? It is hard to stay. Keep going. It is hard to stay regulated, but I am. And then keep going. Yep. You got it. I'm getting. I'm getting better. Yep. Every. All right, where's that A right here? Every day. She said, I'm using letterboard in classes. It's hard to stay regulated, but I'm getting better every day. I would say we're about like 50-50 focus on, she has to focus so much on her body to keep herself regulated that it's, we're trying to engage in the curriculum, so our motor demand and our cognitive demand sometimes get a little out of balance, and that causes a little bit of stress for her. But for the most part, she's doing fantastic. But yeah, that we are using a letterboard. We've done a couple of real-time question and answer with our professor, who's been patient at our writing class and let her throw in a response. It just takes a couple of seconds longer. We've also given our professors permission to come back around to us, if that's part of the conversation. But she's able to participate in class fully. It's amazing to watch.
Awesome, thank you, Grace. Another question from parents or? What do we do in self-care regulation? Can you give me an example of that? Got it. Okay. So Grace, what are things that you do that help with your self-regulation? whether it's, and Jamie asked a question and she was like, for example, I, go get a massage, like, how do you self-regulate? Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
We all we have all the goods.
One thing. One thing I do is unwind in the pool.
For her, it's not a state of being, but a state of mind. And then she said, I also have to engage my body in purposeful movement.
Grace, do you do anything, Grace, do you do anything to recover? Like, because it's so much work for you, like what you said in the class, do you do anything to recover?
Oh, release.
Okay, she said, hold on. She said, oh my goodness. We're having a whole technological issue here. She said, I endure it as long as I can, but then I zone out with music and art.
Yeah. Grace is an amazing artist. That is something that when she was in school, in public school, is that her communication and regulation partner would always have paper and pencil crayon or colored pencils and things like that for her, because that just like helps keep her body regulated. Okay, other questions?
I don't know, at the very beginning, what started this process, did they believe that that we're trying to get to them? We knew that it was worth the effort at the very beginning.
Did you get that? Oh, sorry. Did you, for Grace, did you, like, when you first started, did you believe in this? Like, did you think that you could do it? Like, what were your thoughts at the very beginning? I'll repeat it, sorry. This was the only thing that radically saved my life. So, this is why I have a transcription over here. I cannot keep this in my head. Okay, go ahead, Grace.
Grace said, I thought I could try it, but we had tried so many things that I was skeptical of whether we would succeed.
Nice.
Nice.
Okay.
As either one of you are typing, or someone repeating the words in the type or not?
Okay, so the question is, I'll answer it and then you guys can, as far as from the perspective of like Angela and I. So, Angela, the question was, is someone repeating the word like after? Okay, is someone, can you hear me okay? Okay, is, our goal, is it, like, what do we do when they're spelling the word? And so I'll just explain if it's any different what we do. So you'll see when Angelo he's poking, and he chose to spell on this board because like I said at the beginning, the laminate board is a higher motor demand, and when we have a little bit of anxiety, because we're doing it in front of people, we want the increased sensory feedback to help organize, so we chose to use this board. You'll see that he's mispoking sometimes, and I reset the board to help his eye to get to the letter. He is like for the, for example, I have a lot of spellers that will go T, M, G, right? And at T, M, that doesn't grammatically make any sense. So I know he's going up somewhere in that area, but I don't reset the board every single time he mispokes until like I know that the word doesn't make sense. So he's like TH and then the E, but he could go to I because it could be this, right? The or this. And so there's different things that you're trained as a communication partner. I'm repeating every single letter that he spelled. So it's like he pokes T, and H, and S, and so that's what I'm saying. And then I will say the word, but the word is so I can let Melody know so she can write it down. Or I'll write it down. But I'm trying to get him into a rhythm. That's why it's like T, and H, and put your eyes on it. Because remember, when he's at this level, I can't say up, over, and I can't use my left hand because then I would be influencing his answer. So I'm just saying like T, and H, and S, and T, and the starts, we keep going. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want to know if you're using words to kind of give them, kind of an indication of what
Yeah, so if we're getting like really pokey and nothing that he's poking out is making any grammatical sense, then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, the start of this day, and then let's take it from day, go. So then it also helps me too, because I'm like, where are we in the sentence?
Sometimes when you're spelling, you don't really know where you're at.
Yes. Okay, is there anything different that you want to add, Angela?
Well, obviously you saw me up a little with my hand up, and I'm not as professional as Dana. But it definitely is an exercise in semantics and like your working memory. Like she's saying, what grammatically makes sense, but also the use of the language. What could they possibly be saying there? So yes, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking big picture, like what is the whole thought we're trying to get through to, so that what she's poking or what she's spelling makes sense in that context. If that doesn't make sense, I'll stop it, like Dana said, go back to the word that I was confident that she was trying to communicate or that she spelled. That made sense to me in the context of what we're doing, and then go back from there. But it's always good to go back and start further back than just to be sure.
Yeah, and so what Angela is saying too, just to kind of highlight that, is if things, well, let me even go further back. So when spellers get open and are now like where Angela and Grace are, we don't teach them syntax, we don't teach them grammar, we don't teach them proper sentence structure, they already know that. Okay, so when something goes wrong in the sentence structure, like Angela was saying, we're gonna go, okay, let's go back to, so I'm never gonna say no, because then that's influencing it again. I don't want to say no, like I want to say something. So I'm gonna go, okay, let's go back to the beginning of this, and then continue on. They'll correct it, they'll totally correct it every single time, but it doesn't really, when you're more advanced and you're, like Angela or Grace, it doesn't happen often. It's, sometimes it was a mispoke, and then they just kind of created the past tense, but then it really wasn't supposed to be past tense. So that's where this is all part of the training as a CRP. And this is why, any one of you can't come up here and go, okay, Angelo, so tell me, how's your experience on the letter? He'll poke, but it'll be like, this lady knows nothing. So that's why training is crucial, it's essential, it has to happen. Here, it's me.
6 years, like, if that happens, I always accept the responsibility for not understanding. Like it happened to us at the eye doctor yesterday, and she said a sentence. It was in context what we were talking about, but I didn't understand what she was trying to say. So I always assume that she knows what she's intending to communicate. So I will say, that doesn't make sense to me. Can you tell me again? Or give me another sentence that goes along those lines that does make sense to me, and I'll take the ownership of that.
Yeah, or I'll say something like, tell me more, right? Because the thing is too, the questions that we're posing, we don't want to influence, right, or bias and we do this with each other all the time. It's like, so you really like that dinner, right? Right, like, okay, yeah, I guess, because if we say no, right? But that's where we have to be, and this is again, all part of being trained in a more advanced way, is when you're asking those questions, especially open, I'm saying things like, tell me about whatever. Because then there's no like bias to it. It's their opinion. Rather than being more, and that's where sometimes it's difficult, especially with parents who so want to ask those questions. Like, what do you want for Christmas? Don't you want this? Like, don't you love your sister so much? And like, all this stuff. Like, we have to be really, because the one thing that I've learned about my spellers is that if I didn't ask any question and I just dropped the board in front of Angelo, he's gonna tell me what he wants to share with me. Right? Just like us. Like, I'm going to say to, if I had a question, I would ask the speller, but if they really had something they want to say, they're going to say it. I don't have to ask about it. And the same thing goes with any teenager. It's like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it, right? Well, but what about, no, I don't want to talk about it. So we have to be obviously respectful of them, and it's the same thing. But I've never not had a speller that if there was an issue or they had something that they wanted to discuss, my golly, they are going to discuss it, and you better be prepared for a discussion. Yes?
Is there a trust element that develops?
Oh, yeah.
That you, what I'm saying is there always a good connection between the person, the trained person and the speller? Or there are times when like, this is not connected. Almost like when you go to a therapist or psychologist, sometimes it's not a good fit.
Right. No, totally, there is. And so what do? You continue to go to that therapist.
The trust level.
Well, or you don't, because you're spending money, and you're like, no, I want to find someone who can connect with me. You're going to go a couple times. But the important thing to remember, what I said early on in the talk, was regulation. Part of my job is to regulate. And so the other part of, for Angela and for Grace, is they're going to walk into a room and know everybody's energy. So if their communication partner isn't someone that they can support their regulation, it's not going to, and I've had that where there's communication partners that they really do, they want to spell, but their energy is just off. I've also had an instance where I was coaching a parent, and things were going really, really well. They came in for that session, and I was like, what's going on? Like, super dysregulation between the speller and all this. And in the middle of the word, the mom turns and says, I know what's wrong. And I was like, tell me, please, because I'm trying to figure it out. She goes, I don't presume that he knows this and he can do this. So not only do we have to have good energy, and if I know spellers will eat this person alive if it's not a good match. And so if the person does not presume confidence, he'll tell me. Grace will tell Angela, sorry, it's not going to work. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add, Angela, on that?
I was just gonna add that Grace very much, we had that happen yesterday at the eye doctor. She's like, I always get treated bad when I go here. And because of that experience with them and not, like the man was shouting at her yesterday, she's like, you don't have to yell, you know, like I can hear you. Because that happens, it causes her sometimes to assign and attach, you know, that to that experience. And so, yeah, she lets me know immediately. And then if I don't, she doesn't spell it, I can see it in her body language and her dysregulation. That something's up. Like just now, she was super chirpy, and I pushed back and I said, "What's going on?" And she spelled to me, "I'm so happy you're doing this today." So I was like, I said, "So is that why your mouth is going crazy?" She's like, "Yeah."
And that, is that they're gonna look dysregulated, and it could be, remember, I'm happy, I'm sad, but we don't know, we're only looking at what's on the outside, right? For Grace, her scripting goes up, and then her body gets excited and that kind of thing. Well, it could look like, I'm so happy, right? Grace is so happy, but then she spells, and it's like, this doctor doesn't put in confidence in me, you know, like, I'm actually really ticked. So that's one of the, biggest reasons why we want to give the speller that communication. Grace and Angela, do you have anything to add in terms of what we just talked about? Not having.
Oh, yeah.
Not having complete trust in. Not having trust in my CRP health care. Not having trust in my CRP. Okay, Grace is just going to go real quick and then. Go ahead, Grace. Yep.
She said, I think I'm the only one who can make that call as far as the CRP relationship. And then she said it goes along, I was just writing down the last thing, with how I feel about AAC. I know what she means, I can ask for permission to share it, or if, can I tell her? Why, she said, you can. Her biggest issue with AAC as far as the device goes and using Pro. And every time anybody ever asks her about it, she always says, because I wasn't involved in setting it up, they didn't get my input. So, so the speech therapist sets up the device and they tell you where they think these buttons should go, and she's not included in any of that conversation. So then it becomes not functional to her. And that is what they told me when I took her for an AAC eval when she was 8 or 9. They said, oh, she doesn't find it functional. They didn't know why, but they did see that it wasn't functional for her. I think she's relating to two things.
Yeah, and I actually had a discussion with somebody after about AAC, and their child uses an AAC device, and it's great, and it's gets their needs met. But like Grace just said, it's typically set up by the parents who observe and see, remember insides don't always match outsides, that they see that they love yogurt and they love strawberries and they love this. And then when I have them smelling, it's like, I actually hate yogurt and I never want to stand in the strawberry. Okay, go ahead.
He came into the kitchen one day, grabbed the raisins, handed them to me. My friend was sitting in the kitchen with me, and I got him on the letter, I go, do you want raisins? And he said, no more raisins, anything but raisins. Literally, as his body's like telling me to, open the raisins.
Yeah. So, and we didn't get into this piece of apraxia, but the two most challenging things for someone who has apraxia is initiation and stopping. So that's when I have spellers that come in and they're like, oh, well, they're escapers or they're elopers. And well, that's because they can't stop their body. They understand when you say stop, and more often than not, they want to stop, but they can't stop their bodies. Even when it's like this whole discussion, when you get out of the car, okay, don't run away from the car. They understand that, and their bodies say stop, right? So it's initiation and inhibiting. And so that goes with food, and that goes with any other thing that they do, is that they may not like X, Y, Z on the AAC, and then we practice something, remember, over and over again, it becomes permanent. So now they go, I want raisins, I want raisins, I want raisins. And now it's, I want raisins, but we don't have raisins, so what do you want? I want raisins. And we look at that and go, that's not reliable right there. Insides do not match outsides all the time. So they need to have a way to reliably communicate, and this is a way to do that. Okay, last question, and I think we have to.
Do you always have them spell the whole word, or does a longer answer be like shorthand that they learned, or if you know what letter word they're going for, you can help them get there early?
So the question was, and I'll answer if you have anything, and you and Grace. So the question was, do we ever, or do we always have them spell out the entire word? Is there a way that we do shorthand or like word prediction, kind of, this is what I'm thinking, right? That kind of thing. And so the answer to that is no. And the reason for that would be like, what if they were spelling the word, or that play was so, and it's MEANING, oh, meaningful, right? But what if it's actually, here's the G and here's the S? What if it's meaningless, right? So we totally influence their answer based on what we think, and maybe his body's like smiling and oh, it's so meaningful. And I've had spellers in the past, one, and then I've known other spellers, when that happens, they shut down. And they're like, I'm not using this because somebody is trying to influence me. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, if you have anything, Angela or Grace.
Well, and the reasons probably Dana could explain better than I could. Grace, once she was given the ability to share her thoughts, she doesn't want to reread anything ever. She's going to take the whole sentence and the big vocabulary words, and as hard as it is, that's what she wants to do. I never want her to feel like anything she's saying is like she said, being influenced or dictated by someone else. I do notice for Grace, at this point in our journey, that when she is struggling between balancing her body and regulation and needing to spell in that environment, she will get short answered or not use a whole sentence, which is weird for her. I know something's wrong if that happens, if that makes any sense. But yeah, not Grace. She's going to use all of her big words and take the long way.
And that's the same with Angela. We give them this, and even when I set it up for you, it's like, okay, let's just keep it. We never happens, right? Well, he hasn't had the ability to speak and to speak English. Like, who am I to say keep it short, right? I told you this time, okay, 25 minutes, good. We got a lot of time. And it's true, and there's been many times that I am like, no idea what this word is, Google, that I have to look up the word. I have absolutely no idea what they're spelling. Grammatically, it makes sense, and so I'm going with it, but I have no idea what this word means. And sure enough, it's a word that makes sense and applies and is very fitting for the answer. So, yes.
Angela, what was the most important thing you wanted to communicate to everyone once you learned how to do this?
Okay, here's one for Grace. Last one. What's the most important thing you wanted to communicate to everybody when you could learn? When you
Actually, I wanted it for him. Angela was his name.
Angela,
Yeah.
Grace answer it too.
Okay, great.
I was.
That I was smart.
Knowledgeable. Knowledgeable, mindful.
So it was.
That I was very smart, that I was smart, knowledgeable, mindful, and very compassionate.
There we go. Great.
Communicated her feelings and her dislikes. When I asked for an example of that, she said her feelings of love, she wanted to let everybody know she loved them. And then when the other thing she said was dislikes was about school. She hated her current school we had her in, which is a whole other thing. School! That's one of the ones that she did when I was present, that she hadn't expressed before in session. Since I was such a skeptic, I think I really needed to hear that about the school, so it was good.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that we don't often think about is having and making sure that scholars like Grace and Angelo have the ability to say no. Right, like that's the other thing with some of the AAC places, that we don't always give them that opportunity, and like, what don't you like? Right, it's always like, oh, their favorite things are X, Y, Z, but just like us, we express our like dislikes, and that's not something that we always think about. So,
Yes.
I think we'll end there. Grace and Angela, thank you so much, Grace, for joining.
I want to ask both of you something. We've had,
Okay, say that again.
She said, I'm so happy to help.
I have a question. We've had some cameras going during this time. We originally had not planned on anybody being filmed during this. So I want to ask each of you whether you are comfortable with this being filmed, or shall we ask them to delete this off of their phones? It's entirely up to you.
Grace said yes, absolutely, please share.
Stay clap.
Thank you.
Bye.
Grace, Grace. Invest in wonderful learning and understanding. Very helpful today. Everybody give it up for Angela.
All right, so I'm available if you have any more questions. I know there were some people that had more questions.
We're going to end it with little time here. You can stay around and chat while you want. I know some people need to go grab lunch and get back to your assessments.